crowding out to happen in effect actually would mean that whatever liquidity we have is going to the public sector or the government. I think all four of us have underscored the fact that banks are much more liquid than they ever were. I think what has also been candidly admitted by all four of us is that we are very much more selective in terms of a credit judgment than we were earlier. So the point you're making is that for some reason, banks tend to lend to the government because we have money and there are no other options. What we are saying is we are screening those other options very, very tightly. Now the CIBOR rate or the T-bill rate or the PIB rate is, as I said earlier in my discussion, it's set by their huge borrowing appetite. If government could get its fiscal act together, banks would have no control but to lend the same money at 7% or 6% or 8%. And all that has happened in Pakistan before. So if they are not managing their finances and we are beneficiaries of a good rate, honestly does not imply that the private sector is not getting credit. We all are willing to lend to whatever private sector credit we like today, but we are very much averse to lending at any spread to what we do not like. It's as simple as that. But classically saying crowding out is happening with all this kind of liquidity on the table with the banks, I'm not too sure.
Mayor, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, I really don't think that there's any crowding out because like I said, we don't see any viable projects coming in. I mean, we run the largest investment bank in the country, and the number of project finance transactions I could probably count on one hand. So, I mean, and if that's us, then there's 40 banks. So I don't think there's much happening out there. Like I said, the investors don't know, A, which industry to invest in, and B, whether the industry they invest in will get the energy needs serviced by the infrastructure that's in place right now.
Irfan, do you have a word on this? 1 minute. We'll have the microphone, sir. And please, any other questions? We're short on time, so I'll and keep them quick. Sir, please, I'm going to ask you very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. You're giving money to a borrower who is far exceeded his limits. That's my point.
You answered that question. That the government has already borrowed too much, you're saying. Why give him more? Okay, let's move to a few more questions because we've got plenty of people. Whoever has the microphone has the floor. 1 moment, sir. I see the gentleman behind you with the microphone. Go ahead.
This is Fareed, and it's a simple question. Do this panelist feel that there's an importance or there's a reason for the DFIs which are not available right now in Pakistan? Do they still, we feel that without DFIs, the project financing is not taking place in Pakistan. How could these commercial banks really finding it easier or practical to do project financing in Pakistan?
Okay, who wants to handle that? Maybe not everyone, because we want to go back and forth quickly.
Project financing, like you said, initially was a DFI cup of tea, but with the absence of DFIs, all the banks are now handling all long-term projects. And in fact, when good projects are offered in the market, I would say that at least 20 banks are after that same project. So, you know, like Mathisham just said, that there's no problem in terms of getting liquidity, neither for long term nor for short term in the entire banking space.
I think the desire is for the NDFC, PICIC or BEL kind of an arrangement where things were happening on a more loose or relaxed basis, for the lack of a better expression, although it may sound offensive to some. And maybe they are not happy with the credit appetite that we as commercial banks are showing. And there is need for a specialized institution which would be perforce doing it as opposed to anything else. That is again a government prerogative or up to the private sector if they believe there is need for such an institution. I think it may not make much headway right now, because whoever comes up with such an institution would be still competing with all this liquidity with the commercial banks.
Sir, a question from you. Go ahead, sir. Tell us who you are. Direct question, please.
Yeah, congratulations to ICAP for organizing this beautiful conference. My question is directed to you gave a lot of emphasis and importance to trust, disclosure, transparency.
Okay.
And you said that there has to be these factors there as important factors in lending process. All these factors emanate from the national policy that the public sector has in all these borrowings and operations. What is the impact of national policy to individual businesses in terms of transparency, disclosure, trust? Because in Pakistan, we have been suffering with so much of miscalculations, misreporting. Even the CBR doesn't have the proper figures. So where does the trust comes from, right from the beginning, from the top to the bottom?
Well, we did say Shahzad had the solution to the world's woes with his formula here. So please.
I'm a bit lost with what the question was. It a statement or was it a question?
I think your issue is that consistency and trust is not at the top of the country.
Trust, what can the government do on a policy making level?
Well, I think trust is something, you know, it's very, again, it will look like motherhood and apple pie, and my partners may say that why am I giving this, but trust is something that two people have to have. It's a trust in a marriage, trust in any relationship. And I think if there is lack of trust or there's some gamesmanship happening, you have to put certain caveats on it. For example, if as was being mentioned, that there is understating of numbers, I think in public companies, there's been a lot of debate at different forums about having independent directors. Having independent directors responsible for some of the very serious committees that are formed in it. So you bring in, you have somebody looking out for the shareholders and other stakeholders other than the major sponsors in the project. So, you know, those are the things that, and there's an array of lists that I can take offline with you of what can be done. From a public policy point of view, I think if I look at the corporate governance, and we have some specialists in the room here, you know, that has to be, when we talk about corporate governance and when we talk about board of directors, because in a company, it's at the board level. It's ultimately the board. And if you're lacking corporate governance there, it's going to have a ripple down effect. If you need to start at the top in any organization, and you need to make sure that you have implanted in it things that are going to make sure that things are shared on an even playing field. That's very important. And I think the onus is also on us, because again, the world problems won't be solved after this meeting by me saying and people doing it. I'm also realistic. So I think the onus is also on us to open our eyes and do due diligence. Let's not have the herd mentality. Sometimes people are following each other, and when God forbid a problem comes, there is a domino effect. And this is what happened in the West. And I think we have been very good at avoiding that. But again, there are certain sectors, I won't name them right now, but they were a function of that poor judgment that was placed by the bankers. I think all of us sitting here get paid more than what we should be paid, and we get paid for that because we are bringing in judgment. If judgment is lacking in our, if we don't have judgment, then we shouldn't be, you know, sitting in the seats we are sitting. And that's why you have to look at the whole picture.
We have time for probably 2 or 3 questions. There's one at the back, then I'll have one down at the front, and maybe one more. But we got about 3 questions. Sir, make it direct, please, and make it very short.
My question is directly to Mr. Shahzad, because his bank is worldwide, and I just want to compare the spread used by the banks in Pakistan, which is more, I think, 3 to 4 times more than the other part of the world. That's why the banks are minting money, just because at the cost of the growth of the industry in Pakistan. Why do you don't compare the spread, your lending rate with the KIBOR, just to compare it with the deposit rate given to depositors, saving account holder who are not getting 4, 5, 6%, you are charging 16, 17, 18%. 6, 7 years before, the total profit of the all banks was 6 billion rupees. Now one banks are earning 15 and 16 million rupees, one of the person is sitting here. It's not because of the, you are depending on the lending to the government and not to the other industry, because they cannot afford that much. That's why every day you see the bankers, the defaulters in the banking courts.
There's no